Hi gals and guys, Mark here from Super 100 MPH with you. Today's video is from 1970 and 71, and we're looking at the two Bathurst 500 races that Allan Moffat won back to back. It says here in Wikipedia for 1970, Allan Moffat won his first Bathurst Enduro leading home Bruce McPhee in a 1-2 result for the Ford Works team and their Ford XW Falcon GTHO Phase 2s. It was also the debut of the Holden LC Torana GTR XU1, with the Holden dealer team running 3 cars, spearheaded by Colin Bond, Peter Brock and Bob Morris in another car. And the highest placed Holden dealer team car, as it turned out at the end of the race, was Sandra Bennett and Christine Cole in the number 38 car. We also saw the VG Valiant Pacers run this year, backed by the factory. A private one had run the year before in '69 with Graham Ryan as a private entry, but this year he was sharing with Doug Shivers, and Leo Gagan was driving the other one. The top 3 placed drivers drove the whole race without a co-driver. I thought that was interesting. And of course there was Tony Roberts' big crash at the top of Skyline, and you can see Al Turner, the Ford Works team there, buzzing about a little bit. And we actually did have a comment on our the Big 3 video, from the Four Corners one from 1970. R. Bruce Music posted a comment 11 months ago now, because it's been up for quite some time, where he said, Al Turner is still alive and well and living in Florida. A friend had dinner with him 2 weeks ago. A true gentleman of racing, as opposed to some others I could name in Oz and the US. So there you go. Al Turner still going well. Oh, and of course the 4th of October was the day this race was held. It was the day that Janis Joplin died. So, on to 1971, and this one's in colour. Well, Moffat was driving the XY Falcon GTHO Phase 3 that year, which I think was even a little bit faster. Phil Barnes and Bob Skelton came in second in a similar car, and David McKay came third in another Phase 3. Colin Bond made it home in 4th place in the LC Torana GTR XU1, and this was the year we saw the Chrysler VH Valiant Charger RTE 38 being driven by Leo Gagan and Peter Brown. That was pretty exciting. The other thing that happened, oh yes, Allan Moffat got the cardboard box stuck to his the grille of his car. Didn't seem to affect it in any way. Bill Brown had a huge accident at McPhillamy Park, which I'm sure we've all seen, but for those who haven't, it's pretty frightening. Let's see. So Allan Moffat was a 4-time Bathurst winner, 70, 71, 73 and 77. And of course Allan Moffat and Peter Brock are the only 2 racing drivers to win the 500-mile race, 500-mile version of the race, as well as a 1,000-kilometre version of the race. And of course the other thing that happened in 1971 was 4 men walked on the moon. Apollo 14, Edgar Mitchell and Alan Shepard, and Apollo 15, Dave Scott and Jim Irwin. So, it's over to Neil Crompton for the 1970 Bathurst 500 and the 1971 Bathurst 500.
In 1970, the Big 2 became the Big 3. Not to be outdone by GM and Ford, Chrysler jumped into the race with their 2-door Valiant Pacer. What a gun machine. And Holden moved away from the big V8, opting instead for the narrow-track 6-cylinder flyer called a GTR XU1.
Taking advantage of the pole position, Moffat leads up Mountain Straight, with Bond skillfully manoeuvring into second place ahead of Seaton and McPhee. Speculation about Ford's tactics is rife. There are those who feel Moffat will attempt to break up the field, especially as he's backed up by McPhee and Seaton. But the majority are convinced he'll drive only as fast as the dictates of the race demand. Flashing down Conrad for the first time, Moffat is trailed by Seaton and Bond. In the braking area, Bond pulls out to easily gather in Moffat and Seaton and takes the lead as he negotiates the left-hander into pit straight. Sensing a battle in the David Goliath mold, the huge crowd acclaims Bond as he speeds past the pits, his XU1 going perfectly. But Moffat and Seaton use a little more thrust to keep him within reach as they again head up the mountain. After 5 laps, Moffat regains the overall lead. Resisting Bond's challenge to an early duel, Moffat instead concentrates on pre-race set speeds. Maintaining the form that took him to success in the Tasman Series at Warwick Farm and the Sandown 3-hour race prior to Bathurst, Moffat's control and handling is giving him scope to virtually dominate the 500. Even at such an early stage, it seems only bad luck could rob him of victory, especially as it's now obvious McPhee is splendidly playing the role of backup driver. Bond makes an unscheduled pit stop due to carburetor trouble. Meanwhile, the Brock Morris XU1 moves into second place. Excitement surrounds Moffat's first scheduled pit stop after 45 laps. As new tyres are being fitted on the GTHO and fuel replenished by a well-drilled pit crew, Des West's 4-barrel pacer flashes past to take over the lead. But Al Turner is unperturbed.
We've made our first stop with Bruce McPhee, and it took 2 minutes and 9 seconds to change 3 tires, and we put in 25 gallons of fuel. We've got Moffat fueled up again with 4 tires and 25 gallons, and they're both out now. And we'll just have to see how it goes.
Brock comes in and hands the wheel over to 21-years-old Bob Morris, competing in his third 500. The West Brown Valiant pits for a scheduled stop and loses the lead. In fact, time consumed during the stop puts the pacer back into 5th place overall, but it still holds a comfortable class lead. Bond makes up lost time, improving several places to be in the first 10, but is again forced into the pits, this time with valve trouble. To clear the pit area, the XU1 is taken off the track, putting Bond virtually out of the race. McPhee is now second, with West a lap behind in 4th place. Morris comes in with similar symptoms to those of Bond's car. The car is in need of major repair. The Christine Cole Sandra Bennett car has a troublesome front tire, but it's not serious enough to put them out of the running for the ladies' trophy. Firmly entrenched as leader, Moffat is well in command, while McPhee holds a backup position in 2nd place. Bond's Holden is going well again, but he's many laps behind. There's an atmosphere of calm confidence in the Ford camp. Their pit crew has been by far the fastest during stops, and Moffat is capitalizing on time saved. Doug Chivers' pacer is making leeway on the overall leaders, and barring accidents should be up there at the finish. Holland has to make another pit stop so that Chivers could then take over the lead in Class C, in which there's been only 2 retirements. 3rd placed overall, Holland pits. With some 30 laps to go, he changes to the new 350 faster compound Dunlop tires, and these in fact improve his lap times by about 3 seconds. Moffat has more than a lap advantage over Holland, so the XU1 faces an impossible task. Tapsell and Leighton still lead Class A. Roberts is improving his position and is in the same lap as the leader. The unruffled Moffat still restrains his mount, his fastest lap 2:55, being more than 5 seconds slower than his qualifying figures. The slow-motion camera dramatically illustrates the skillful handling of the semi-flying cars through the S's. Lapping practically the whole field, Moffat's lead over McKay has been narrowed as the Fords continue their dominance. Leader at one stage during the morning, West is now 9th overall. Moffat is right on schedule for his final pit stop, during which the crew makes their fastest turnaround. They've taken no longer than 2 minutes 45 on any stop, but this one, with fuel and 4 tires, is only 2 minutes 9 seconds. Moffat is cruising less than half a minute ahead of McKay as the race reaches its closing stages. Roberts recaptures 3rd place from Chivers with some attacking driving. But almost immediately after going over Skyline, Roberts' car spins and crashes backwards down a steep slope. Officials and spectators rush down to render assistance, but although the car is a write-off, fortunately Roberts is only dazed. Moffat rounds Forest Elbow and heads for Conrod Straight for the last time. He leads McKay and goes on to win from his teammate with Don Holland 3rd, a lap behind. Ford's manager Al Turner gives credit to all in the Ford team.
They drove exactly the way we wished them to drive. It's a team effort. It's been a team effort all the way through, and we're very proud of the result. But I must say this, I think it's firstly a credit to our product to do this, and secondly, to the fine group of fellows that work for me. I've got a tremendous group of young fellows, and they've worked hard, and they've done a tremendous job here in the pits today, and I just can't say too much for them.
Hardie-Ferodo General Manager George Hibbert presents the victor's laurel wreath and outright winner's plaque to a triumphant Moffat, following his marathon 6 hours, 34 minutes, 26 seconds at the wheel. Beginning his racing career in Victoria and later continuing in Canada and the United States, Moffat returned to Australia early last year to become quickly established as a top driver and master strategist. And that's how the 1970 Hardie-Ferodo was run and won.
1970, and Allan Moffat made his first big impression. The battles that developed between Moff and Brock were fantastic, and as Allan recalled, it was very hard work.
Well, fun has never been an adjective I've described any of my activities with. It's always been tough, no matter what you're doing. And when you're trying to win, naturally, it's even harder. The Falcons in those days had a mechanical edge with a V8, naturally, and Bathurst was made for a V8. And apart from the debacle in 1969, which was my introductory year to Bathurst, as it was with Peter and a number of other young fellows, I learned a lot in 69. I still believe if they'd left me to my own devices, I probably would have won it instead of just managing a 4th. But in 70, I came to grips with it.
Describe driving the cars, the GTHO Falcon. It was an enormous car, a heavy car, and when we look at it now, it had virtually bicycle tyres on it. It must have been a handful.
I was never very conscious of the weight. Driving one as a personal car, you tended just to sort of become very much at one with it. The worst part about racing in those days, and something that our authorities took quite a while to come to grips with, was just flopping around in the seat. It was a nightmare. And I remember particularly in 70, having gone all the way, it wasn't any blisters on my hands after the race that was any concern. It was the welts on my back that stayed there for almost a week, just rubbing on the vinyl. You had to have the standard seat, and no matter how you tightened the seat belt, we got thrown around dramatically, because Bathurst isn't exactly what you call your cool, calm, collected circuit. You do get chucked around a lot there. So that was the one thing I remember most.
I guess people tend to overlook those sort of factors too. I mean, we talk a lot about the technology involved in the cars and the way that's changed, but in the safety area and the apparel and in the modern day racing seats, that stuff's changed dramatically.
Well, certainly, sure. I mean, I do believe we had Nomex suits on. We were probably pretty avant-garde, but we weren't too far away from the days when the Gagans arrived with their tuxedos to participate. I never made it in a tuxedo, but I certainly recall driving in a T-shirt. But because it was production touring car racing, and I think they may have allowed us to call them improved production touring cars. I'm not even so sure about that. I'd have to check on that. But certainly the car in its entirety had to be as manufactured. And that meant if it had a cigarette lighter or a little console between the seats, and we know what some people used to do with that, all the trim had to be exactly standard. And I think the only thing we were permitted in the rules, I had a fairly padded device on the base of the seat belt to try and stop my hips, at least, from going into the door closer.
The next race was 1971, and it was best remembered for one man's lucky escape from a terrible crash. 71 was the year Bill Brown rolled his GTHO Falcon along the fence at McPhillamy Park.
Phil Barnes co-drives with Bob Skelton. John French, backup driver to Moffat. Fred Gibson in the third Works Falcon. Gold Star champion Leo Gagan. Bob Beasley and Bob Muir share one of the 9 Charger entries. The only full-time professional in the race, Allan Moffat, with Ford marketing director Keith Horner. Bob Morris drives one of the 13 Falcons. Harry Firth masterminding the Holden dealer team. 1969 co-winner Colin Bond and David McKay. In with a strong chance is Des West. Tension approaches its peak. In a few seconds, the 60 starters will be on their way. Those at the rear of the field battle for positions in the charge to Hardie-Ferodo corner. Moffat powers up Mountain Straight, already out on his own. So solid is the pace, the field is fairly well spread out midway through the opening lap. Moffat is pursued by French and McKay, who's improved 1 place on his grid position. In fact, the first 8 in the early stages are all Falcons. Unleashing its newly developed power, Moffat accelerates the GTHO to something around 140 miles per hour down Conrod. French also has his foot down. Into pit straight, and Moffat sets about dictating the pattern of the race. Driving at a speed to suit himself, Moffat is able to conserve his car, which is responding to every demand. But with the race not yet 5 laps old, the Holden dealer works car of Bond is the first of the fancied entries to strike trouble. Team manager Harry Firth makes some pertinent comments.
Bondi got a whack from Bartlett, which shoved him into the curve, and the tyre got whacked on the curve, and we had to change it. But nearly a lap off, you know, a fair bit of time, which we didn't wish to lose.
So it was that the first pit stop of the race was made by Bond's Torana, a lap lost that'll take some making up. The Falcons increase their margin over the smaller cars, who, whilst having a cornering advantage, are outsped on the straights. There's been a few bumps around the circuit to the consternation of Chrysler's racing manager John Ellis.
We've had a couple of instances of bad luck with a car crashing up the top with one of the private entries, Tom Norton, but generally they've held together very well, I think.
straying cardboard curtain attaches itself firmly to Moffat's radiator, which is certain to cause apprehension in the Ford pit. Marsden talks of taking immediate action.
Yes, it's surprising what can happen in motor racing. The best prepared cars can pick up a cardboard box. So we're just looking at it now. We'll possibly pull him in very quickly, pull it off and get him straight out again.
Ignoring the pit signal, Moffat stays out on the track, and Marsden approves of his action.
We offered him the opportunity to come in, but he was so happy that he almost jumped out of the car and told us that he wasn't coming in. His car is running perfectly, and he's a very happy person at this stage.
Performing reliably, the Chargers face formidable class opposition from the Torana XU1s, 13 of which are in the field. Running in 4th place in the John Newell entry is Bill Brown. At McPhillamy Park, a burst tyre on Brown's car causes the most horrifying crash ever witnessed at Bathurst. Bill tells how it happened.
As I come over the blind approach to McPhillamy Park corner at a speed in excess of 100 miles an hour, a tyre burst on the car, causing it to veer straight ahead into the bank. And I was a bit worried, for the crowd's sake, that the car would sort of jump the fence and end up in amongst the people. There was just crashing and glass breaking and banging and carrying on. When the car finally came to rest, I was still conscious, and they just ran over and they started to tip the car up. And I yelled out to them to stop, smell petrol, and I asked if anyone's smoking, would they kindly leave. By this time the crash truck had arrived and I knew everything was all right. Myself, I felt one of my legs was caught. I didn't know what was going on there because at the time the back of the seat had broken and I was laying down flat in the car, luckily for me. And I suppose I've been there for 5 or 6 minutes and they finally got me out. I had a look at the car and then I went to Bathurst Hospital.
Fortunately, Brown's injuries were only of a minor nature. At Forest Elbow, Leo Gagan and Doug Whitefoot brush with spectacular results.
We have a time at about 1 minute 50, and for that we have put on at least 30 gallons of fuel and done 4 complete tyres. He's a very happy man. Every time he comes by, the smile gets bigger.
Timekeeping for Moffat is his wife Pauline, who nowadays regularly carries out this task. Consolidating his grip on the classic, Moffat has his rivals struggling to keep within range. Having helped in the production of the Chargers, Leo Gagan's knowledge of their capabilities is invaluable. He hands over to co-driver Peter Brown during the second pit stop. '68 winner Bruce McKay. A gratified Firth as Bond and Brock now lead their class. But Bill Stanley is really pushing. Now in control, Moffat's averaging around 249. There's some close calls for those pressing a little too hard. Moffat has an advantage of almost 2 laps and, barring misfortune, is assured of victory. Barnes and Skelton have taken over second place and McKay is close behind. His concentration inflexible, Moffat is in no danger of becoming complacent. Bond is now 4th behind the Falcons of Skelton and McKay, running 2nd and 3rd respectively, but they're all too far back to threaten Moffat. On Conrod, in the last of the 130 laps, Moffat is a happy man as he approaches Murray's Corner.
After 500 miles, I can assure you this is the happiest turn a driver can make, is this left-hander onto the straight, waiting for the jubilation of his pit crew to give him the wave of finishing the race.
Moffat's nearest opponent is over a lap behind, and his overall time of 6 hours, 9 minutes, 49.5 seconds betters the previous record by over 20 minutes.
In the skilled hands of Howard Marsden, Allan Moffat and the HO were an unbeatable combination. Despite the cardboard box incident, this victory was trouble-free and never in doubt.
It was the beginning of my association with Carlton. Yeah. I didn't even know it was there. One of the greatest facets of the Ford engine in the 351 form 351 cubic inches that is, was that it could run extremely hot and not really be bothered at all. And even in those days, I don't recall how fast we were coming down Conrod, but it was 150 plus miles an hour. And as such, the cooling was superb. The cars always had the heavy-duty radiator in a way that's part of the air conditioning option which was available through the company. And they gave me a sign that said, radiator blocked. And I just waved to Peter Jeffrey, who was my chief mechanic at the time, and said, don't worry, gauge is hardly moved. We weren't in radio control, naturally. And it was amazing how it stuck on there. A lot of people thought, oh, well, it was one of those funny things.
They were very tough races, and there was no shortage of opposition. Do you distinctly remember which drivers or which cars were the ones that you most feared, the guys that really made you work and earn your keep in those days?
Well, really, Ford entered a three-car team on many occasions, so just keeping Freddie Gibson at bay was a pretty good start. And that was always a pleasant chore, because Freddie and I got along extremely well. I respected him enormously, and he helped a lot with little perks and developments as the cars went through the years. And we were a good team. John French was the court jester on many occasions, kept us all smiling when we could. But I was aware of my responsibilities to try and win. I was a paid professional driver, and as such, if we were going to get one through, I felt very keenly about trying to do that. Unfortunately, Harry Firth and a young brat by the name of Peter Brock had the same intentions all the time. So we really did have plenty of opposition from the XU1s if we ever faltered. And although the V8 had its advantages going up Mountain Straight and could haul the mail, as I mentioned, fairly quickly down the straight, it had very lackluster brakes. And it did roll a lot through the corners. And as I recall, the Goodyear tires were about probably a little wider than some of the motorbike tires that are currently being used in Grand Prix racing. So we didn't have a lot of lateral stability. And the XU1s were very nippy and very well driven, naturally, with Colin and Peter, and they were always a big threat.
I know that you didn't pursue it in terms of having fun, but there must have been some fun times associated with the sport, particularly back in those days when perhaps there weren't quite the commercial pressures that there are today. True or false?
One thing I recall is that people got together after the race, and you genuinely had a letdown or a bit of a tear-up. And that's not hard when you're working hard in pleasant company. And there were some good parties after Bathurst. That's disappearing these days. But I don't think I can go down on tape giving you any more information than you've already got, and I hate to think what you're doing to me even as I sit here.
Well, thanks for watching, guys. Much appreciated. If you like this video, please hit the like, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. And I just wanted to mention one more thing about Allan Moffat's book. He brought out a book at the end of last year. It's called Climbing the Mountain, which he co-wrote with John Smales. And look, I was reading a great review by Peter McKay just today, actually, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. Looks like it'll be well worth getting, and it's published by Allen and Unwin. You can get one from Dimmicks for $39.99, and I think eBay had them. They might be out of stock. But until next time, see you later.